And good morning. Today is Tuesday, August 25th. It's still Monday, August 24th if you are in the United States. Welcome to the Antrea community meeting. For today, we have a fairly packed agenda. We have a few different topics. As you may have noticed on the Slack channel, we first need to agree on alternate dates to not lose a meeting because of the US labor holiday. The current proposal is to meet again next Monday and then restart with the bi-weekly period. So basically next meeting will be Monday, August 31st, and then Monday, September 14th. These will allow us, to not have a 4 weeks gap because of the US labor holiday. And I think it will also play nicely with the October vacation in Beijing, in China. Otherwise, as it will allow us to avoid having another 4 week gaps. If there is if there is no opposition to this, I will probably just proceed to approve the motion and say that the next meeting will be on Monday 31st. Is there any comment on the topic? Perfect. So either you cannot hear me or there is no comment on the topic. In any case, it's fine. Next meeting will be there for next Monday 31st. If you are not in the US, of course, it will be Tuesday, September 1st. And let's move to the next topic in the agenda, which is the conversation that we were not able to finish 2 weeks ago on network policy v2. So we can probably start with that. I don't remember who was leading that conversation. Was it Abhishek? Was it you? Abhishek is not even on. No, Abhishek is on the call. Yeah.
Cody, you want to go ahead?
No, but I can lead that conversation.
Okay, perfect. Cody, go ahead.
First off, before I get going, what is the? I know we have several things on the agenda, so I want to be conscious of how much time I use. How much time do we have for this?
15 minutes will be good.
Okay, perfect. Well, let me share my screen with everyone. There we go. Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, but I was hoping for those 90s dance hits. I thought
Yeah, my kids for their recess today, since we're homeschooling, we're doing a jam out to 90s dance, so we had a lot of fun. It gets them up and moving. So network policy v2, we have been meeting for about 2 months now, and the meeting really started off in a fairly ad hoc manner. Jay Vyaz from VMware started some of the initial conversations with the network SIG, and then the meeting has since blossomed into a full sub-project of the network SIG. What I'd like to do tonight is talk to you a little bit about the structure of the sub-project, where we currently are. We're far from done, but I think that we're actually moving together or moving forward now with a lot more process, and hopefully should within the next 2 to 3 weeks actually begin getting to a point where we can begin to take some of the initial output of this meeting back to the larger SIG. So just to give you a little idea of what's all involved here, I've included a link, and I will post this to the Antrea Kubernetes Slack at the end, and Antonin, if we want to include this in any meeting notes, I'll make sure that you get the proper information here at the end of the meeting. There is a Google Doc that's tracking the sub-project agenda. It's also linked out from the GitHub under the Kubernetes SIG network. We're currently meeting on Mondays at 1300 Pacific Daylight Time. and that's the Zoom information. And the current members from the Antrea community that I know that are involved, and if I've missed anybody, please let me know, is Abhishek, Jay, myself, Antonin, and Andrew. So one of the things that we've had a lot of discussion on is in evolving the network policy v2, we wanted to consider several things, but primarily, should we extend the API for network policy beyond just being a developer-focused API? If everybody's familiar with upstream Kubernetes network policy, you'll know that the API is very namespace-centric in that you can create network policies that only target a single namespace. And that works very well typically for developers protecting their applications that reside within all the components of that application reside within one namespace. However, we found that there tends to be a preference for native extensions to network policy. So this would either be, for example, native Antrea policies, native, Calico policies, native Cilium policies, etc., for protecting the cluster as a whole. So if I'm a cluster administrator and I want to write policies that have a global effect and that can enforce a rule set across multiple namespaces, for example, I don't have those capabilities with the current upstream network policy API. We've also considered some other personas. So by the way, that one was cluster administrator. So basically extending it to one of the primary use cases here of that extension would be cluster administrator. But we've also considered other personas as well, such as a network operator, a compliance administrator, which would really be just another form of, multiple forms of administrators who may not be responsible for the day-to-day operation of the cluster, but have security concerns and that fit a global or within a global scope and or audit, and so making it easier to reason about what has actually been implemented and is in effect in terms of network policy. Early on, we had a lot of user stories that were thrown at us. I'm going to see if I can switch over to this project here. So where is this at? Here we go. So early on, we had a lot of user stories that were linked in. So just to take you down through this, I'm not actually going to go into these specific user stories tonight. 15 minutes is not going to be adequate to cover that, but I just wanted to tell you it was a very kind of free-flowing, tell us your idea, we'll have some discussion, we'll get some notes about that. Unfortunately, this early format of the meeting didn't provide for a lot of structure. We did get a lot of ideas on the table though, and so that was very useful, and we were able to begin classifying some of those ideas into some categories. So I came up with an initial set of criteria to begin bringing a more objective metric to how we were going to rate these, because at the end of the day, there's a couple things at play. Number one, the network SIG has certain priorities that go beyond just network policy, for example, and we have to have a way to prioritize what we want to work on, because obviously we're not going to be able to take all of this at once. And number two, some of the ideas that were being tossed out, while they would improve, I think, the use of Kubernetes, and specifically in securing network connections within Kubernetes, but may or may not have been within the actual formal scope of a network policy API. And so we kind of had an initial set of criteria we talked about, the heaviest weighted being that, well, is this user story that we're actually talking about even API related? What is the demand for that story, right? So we wanted to focus on consumers of network policy and users, but we also wanted providers who have to implement these stories, right, to have some say on what is actually doable and how do they have it prioritized in their roadmaps. Is it compatible with V1? Are we talking about are we talking about extending V1 or introducing entirely new resources? And also, is it improving usability? We also talked about improving multi-tenancy. I've got that layered, although that was a lesser concern in the initial scope for V2 policy. And I listed syntactic sugar because we talked a little bit about syntactic sugar. A lot of the user stories that were coming in were already achievable with the existing network policy. However, the community didn't feel that either it was clear on how that user story could be solved with existing policy. And so basically it would, we could improve the usability. So a lot of the syntactic sugar stuff that we were initially thinking about really might just fall under improved usability. So with that, I want to show you kind of as of last week and this week where we have ended up in terms of our focusing of the efforts around this group. Currently, Jay created a repo that we are in the process of requesting actually an official repo under the SIG network where we're going to move this repo. This is a temporary working area right now. What we ended up doing is we drafted a set of volunteers, an initial set of volunteers that would allow us to assign some ownership to some different areas so that we could get started in taking the ideas that had been inbounded and we'd taken notes on and begin drafting those into the individual KEPs. And so we decided to take a two-pronged approach. One, we wanted to create an Uber Kubernetes enhancement proposal that really spelled out the overarching goals and scope of what we wanted to accomplish with a V2 policy. In addition to that, so that we wouldn't get stuck in one KEP, we wanted to break out the individual user stories where it made sense into smaller KEPs that could be adopted and approved and implemented on a per KEP basis so that we could make incremental progress forward. We created an initial README that where we're in this repository. So at the top level of this repository, the README is going to capture essentially that Uber KEP or the scope and objectives and goals that we want to, and also even more importantly, the non-goals of this group. This is very much a draft in progress. We've had one working meeting. Obviously, KubeCon was last week. And so we were trying to balance everyone's schedule with that and with trying to at least get an initial draft started here. So what we're working on right now, and I've only got a couple minutes left. I want to leave time for the other pieces of the agenda tonight. We're setting the context. We're setting the motivation for why we're doing this. Some goals and non-goals, specifically, some things like, not supporting network policies that span multiple clusters, really not talking about encryption of traffic, some things that may not really fit the Kubernetes network policy API, as well as, other things like defining what the actual tightest boundary for a security policy could be. For example, right now we're not addressing things like intrapod restrictions in terms of like process restriction, kubectl exec restrictions, those types of things. And then in terms of additional deliverables, we're going to deliver some initial concepts. We're going to actually list out the individual, user stories. We're actually going to talk about, some implementation direction once we've captured those user stories. Another important piece of this actually is this thing called templates here, and I think we need to probably better define this, but we also wanted to have a library of patterns and use cases of existing V1 policy, common use patterns, right? So that as we think about V2, we also have something to compare and contrast against on V1, so that we can actually have an objective say, hopefully, of whether or not we made it easier or more usable. And so we have a separate parallel effort that's actually trying to capture in one place all the patterns that are commonly found for doing network policies using the V1 primitives. So from a stories perspective, we also have kind of a list of initial stories as they came over almost kind of verbatim from some of the initial work. Some of the stories are not clearly articulated as yet. And so one of the things I'm doing, for example, is taking some of these stories and then within each one of those stories, we're actually creating individual keps in this directory. So for example, these will capture the user story, all the kind of boundary conditions, and have you considered what the impact of this is on other Kubernetes processes, those types of things within these stories. So for example, one of the user stories that came up was, we want to be able to target named resources in our policies, not just things where we select by label. And so, we'll define, as a policy creator, I want to target source and destination endpoints and network policy rules by referring to named resources rather than resource metadata. Okay, so I'm going to, wrap up kind of what our current work is and what we're doing between what we have captured in this repo and what we're moving over from a lot of the commented notes here, right? So a lot of this is still in the process of being moved over to that repository so we can have a more formal process on tracking changes and working on these individual keps. My action for our community is take a look at both of these documents. If we see something that is inherently wrong or obviously missing, those types of things, that you put a PR into currently this network policy sub-project, either for that story or to make just submit an issue about what the omission is, or et cetera, and we'll try to pick that up. And what we're going to do before each meeting moving forward is on Friday, we're going to look through this repository and the issues either requiring the most discussion or have had the most interaction. We're going to prioritize and use our open forum to bring those up for discussion. So Salvatore, I think I've taken at least a full 15 minutes. Are there any questions on what's going on V2 that I can answer for anybody?
Yes, Cody, you were great. Actually, I think you took exactly 15 minutes and 30 seconds, so which is great from a time perspective. And I think we also have time for a couple of questions. Actually, I have a question which is probably a long shot. I saw one of the goals is the migration from V1 to V2 APIs. And with the API migrations, one of the problems typically is that users, especially the ones with long-running deployments, tend to be stuck as much as possible on the older APIs. So since eventually you want to stop supporting both for manageability reasons, what is the plan? Do you have a plan already for easing the migration?
As a matter of fact, we did discuss this today in the meeting, and I wanted to draw a line between, talking about how we do this at so migrations in terms of like the native runtime enforcement engine, right? Like how it does migrations, and us having a clear idea on how do we migrate the API, itself. And so we will probably have, as part of the implementation of this project, either a tool, if it's a policy that can be migrated automatically, right? A tool that can migrate all of those, and a tool that will basically call out policies that need manual intervention for that migration. So it's something that we're definitely thinking about from a scoping perspective, but it wouldn't be a tool that is native to any particular implementation. Now, one other thing I'll point out here, that we're trying as much as we can to stick to API related things, but there are a whole slew of user stories that deal with a common tool set that basically makes the use of network policies easier across the board. And we've even talked about things like a CLI utility that would basically map out an API for a CLI, but that would be up to the individual enforcement engines to actually implement that CLI. So this type of a tool for migration might fall into that category as well.
Just to add a little more color to that. So I think, based on all the user stories that we have collected, on a high level, some of those user stories map to a cluster scoped network policy, which would be a new resource. So in that case, there is no migration. Then there is a list of other user stories which kind of map towards some sort of a tool, a DevOps tool or a CLI, which would help gain more visibility, or which is similar to what we have done in Antrea, the Querier as part of Jake's intern project. So that again is like a very separate scope for the user stories. The third part is where the application developer focused network policy APIs needs a revamp. Now we haven't yet decided whether we need to do a V2 of network policy API, or those user stories can be done in an additive fashion. Now, if we do a V2, I think we should be able to do some sort of conversions within the API to do like an implicit conversion from V2 to V1. That should help in the migration effort. But if we do an additive V1, then I think a lot of defaulting and all that can come into picture to help out with that. But those decisions are not yet like finalized. I on my side, I have an action item to add some of those proposals and see which user stories require V2 and which of those user stories can be done in an additive fashion.
All right. Thanks for the clarification, Abhishek. And is there any other question, any final question I will say on network policy V2?
One question. So maybe you guys talk about that. I joined a little late. So if we have any new idea we want to propose, what's the best way now? Should we just propose the feature in our mind, or we need to create a user story, or we should just contact one of you guys to help us?
So it's not, one, it's not too late. It's not too late, Jinjin, to get in new stories. Two, I would recommend if it's a story that is either it's either not captured in one of the docs, or you want to clarify one that's in one of the docs that I've referenced. And again, remember, we're in the process of migrating a lot over to this repo. Just post an issue with your user story and some of the additional detail.
We must start from user story, right? We cannot just directly have an idea or something.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think the user story is preferred because at the end of the day, the SIG network is going to look at like why do we need this? That's right. A lot of the things that we have already put came from like a developer's perspective, but people always want user stories. Okay. Why do we need this?
Okay, probably let's think of that. I'm asking just because I'm not very good at user story. So yeah, probably we can talk more offline, I guess. I want to spend more time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if it's something you want to discuss with me, prior, or Abhishek, call a meeting, we'll get that discussed. But if it's something that's you already have it kind of lined out, just post a user story and we'll start commenting on it, or an issue, I mean.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions, or are we ready to move on to the next topic?
I think we can move to the next topic. Next topic on the agenda should be fairly quick, is the redefinition of, naming for Antrea API groups. I'm going to share on the Zoom chat the link to a document that describes the current proposal. There we go. So perhaps Janjun, do you want to present this document?
Sure. How about I just print the GitHub issue? We have a GitHub issue.
Yeah, sure. That's a good idea.
I have the final proposal we have. Could you see my screen? Oh, not this one.
Yes, I can see your screen, but maybe it's not. This is
this one.
Okay, perfect. Yep. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before for some time. Since we are adding more features, probably do some adjustment of existing API groups. Especially originally have the light working group. Now we call it light working, but actually used for the message between controller agent, and the controller use that API group to publish compute the light policy and the group to agent. For now, since we're adding new features, we kind of feel a little hard to add a new group for these features. Or at least we should, in some way, to adjust existing groups for this, to find a place for these new features. And then we had some discussion offline over that Google Doc. I think Salvatore just shared a link. Here, I just create an issue for the proposals that are agreed on that Google Doc. Basically, we're saying we'll keep most of the API group unchanged. So you still have this core group. Now it's for common types and external entity and external node. And then maybe later we can put more common types or common resources there. For example, one possibility for is grouping, just one example here. And that's also one proposal I want to propose for net policy v2, by the way, to have a separate grouping resource to define any groups can be used by net policy, and in our case, maybe by some other policies. And then, yeah, for the current networking group, originally we kind of agreed to move to internal group. Internal API group that will be used for any internal messages between components. And for now, it's mainly controller agent. For here, we found one problem that we cannot use internal to be the API group name in Golang because finally, this API, the package generated from the Golang schema, Golang spec will be put into the internal directory, but the Golang treat the internal directory, the package under internal directory to be internal. So we cannot use that, and we have some new proposals. Probably that's one major topic I want to discuss in this meeting. But for now, let's skip this one and let's talk about that later. And let's continue for other groups where they are concluded. And then security, it's running a group here. We'll just keep that one. For now, it's only for Antrea net policy CRDs. But potentially we can add other network security features. And for the kind of networking group, since we moved that one to internal, or probably we have a new name for that, we can start to add new, in my mind, level 2 to level 4 networking features to that group. For example, when we do IPAM, maybe we could put IPAM resource and IPAM tabs to the networking group. And when we do SNet policy, we can create CRDs for SNet policy there. And even for this node port local proposal, I think we present several weeks ago, probably can also go to networking API group. And then for ops and the system, the metrics, we just keep them unchanged. Ops for all the ops stuff, troubleshooting, debuggability, and observability stuff. We have traceflow CRD and support bundle there, and probably have more ops features there. And for system, is more for system level monitoring and runtime information. Like we have monitoring CRD, and we put some system component information in system API group. And for metrics, as well for exporting metrics. So this one is a kind of proposal. Any question before we move to what should be the new name for internal API group?
I had one question, Jinjin.
Yep.
Ops, system, and metrics are really all very closely related and all have to do with visibility. Do we anticipate a lot of different CRDs underneath each one of these groups, or what is the reason for kind of keeping all of those into separate API groups?
Sure, I think that's a good question. So I think one reason that originally we started from finer grained groups. You can say we have a security group only for security policy, and we talk about some networking group. If you like Kubernetes, of course, we are different from Kubernetes. Kubernetes covers more aspects. But if you like Kubernetes, Kubernetes only have one networking group for all the networking features. So I kind of feel if we want to continue this finer grained groups division, then probably even for ops system and metrics, you will do a finer group too. And also for some group like metrics, I think we're just following some conventions in Kubernetes world. I think in Kubernetes use of the metrics API group for metrics. For system, I'm not sure. Chair and others, maybe you guys know. Do you have a system API group in other projects in Kubernetes?
No, it doesn't have. We have this name at the beginning because that was the most proper at that time. We don't think of others.
Okay.
And one thing I just thought of that for the ops group, we cannot have CRD and Antrea API service in the same group because this path can either be used by CRD or API service. So
that means support bundle should be moved to system.
Yes. Yeah.
No,
the system group also has a CRD, right? So
for now, we put the monitoring CRD in what group?
System. Let me check. I don't remember, but
system.
Oh, system.
The support bundle should be in systems group too, right?
I mean, support bundle is a Antrea service, right? Antrea API service, right? It's not a CRD, so you cannot coexist with the CRD in the system group.
Sure, but what API group we put as support bundle now?
Like maybe the monitoring CRD is not in system group. I think. Let me check.
Yeah, I think the monitor CRD is in the cluster information.
I see. Okay, I remember that. Okay. Then I don't know. If we go that route, then we must have a different group for CRD and API. Actually, when we discuss over the Google Doc, we talk about another approach that we have separate group for CRDs. For at least at that time, more people prefer not to do that and prefer to have this fine-grained group for different features. Sure, I'm not sure if you guys changed your mind or you have some other ideas.
Were you asking me, Jinjin?
If you have a proposal, yes, please share.
No, I don't have a proposal, and it was just more of a general question. The only other question I had regarding that was how we evolve the versioning, I guess, of these groups, right? Are all of the CRDs that are composed or used together, right? Isolated into their groups, and then they can evolve at different rates. And as long as we've accomplished those two things and we have a clear separation of the APIs, then this should be fine. I just want to make sure we don't have any pieces of the API that are crossing groups that it might evolve at different rates.
Sure. I think the actual complexity in our, we have both CRD and we also have our own API. And then sometimes the CRD and the data is supposed through our API functionally, they may fall into the same group. For instance, we cannot really use a single group for both CRD and API, so we have to separate them. So I think we have other topic for this meeting. So
sure,
probably let's
we'll take it offline. That's fine.
Yeah, we can do more time on that. For here, let's talk about this internal group a little more. Hopefully, you guys can share your opinion, and let's just choose one. So no matter which way we go, right? We still want a separate group for communicating between controller agent. Since we cannot use internal, I think the team here proposed some other alternative names. for example, have this implementation or short name for implementation and the control plan. And the CP also a short name for control plan. And the control plan internal, I think that is from Sartori. There are also some other names from Antonin and abstract, like backend, local, and private. I think according to our discussion, we kind of feel these three can cause some misunderstanding, can mislead the audience because they can mean different things. So probably we'll just exclude them from the candidates. So I'm not sure we can conclude from in this meeting or not, but do you guys have any opinion, please share here. Like, do you guys have any preference over these candidate names? Maybe I can start from sharing my thoughts. I kind of prefer the first one, or maybe the third one, or the fourth one. Basically the same, but just one the short name for the former. Anyone have any opinion, please just share, or you can send your opinion offline through Slack or email.
Thanks, John. Yeah, go ahead, Colby.
I would say from a user perspective, Jinjin, that the control plane name and the private name give me the quickest indication as a user that I don't want to use this API group.
That's right. That's also one of the considerations I think Sartori also called that out. Probably we want to make it clear. It's more.
Yeah, I think it's less about for us, but rather for what a user is going to, basically discouraging a user from using that.
Sure. For the one reason we don't want to call it private, just because private can mean different things. You can mean public API, private API. For our API, we don't really have private API. Even it's all for our internal communication, that API is disclosed out. And our CI tool also call it API. So we don't really want to treat it as something really private. And it also relates to Kubernetes API server for API aggregation.
Sure. I really like control plane, but that's my 2 cents. I'm sure that there's other opinions on here as well. So.
Yeah, I think that we can probably finalize this discussion on the GitHub issue. And if you don't mind, I will use the last 20 minutes of the meeting to introduce a new topic, which is the Antrea operator. I mean, it's not really new because we've been talking a bit about it already. But yeah, now there is let's say, a design proposal. And Dantin, do you mind to present it? Are you okay with presenting it?
Yeah, sure.
Please go ahead.
So for the Antrea operator, the purpose to introduce it is we want to let Antrea running on OpenShift 4 because it's a requirement on OpenShift 4 that resources need to be created by a cluster operator in the cluster bootstrap process. So for the Antrea operator, it is used to deploy and manage Antrea resources, including the Antrea agent, Antrea agent daemon set, Antrea controller deployment, and other Antrea resources like CRDs, RBAC resources, and config map. Also, Antrea operator will monitor the resource state and compare with the desired state to and update the status in operator status. So let me introduce the first key point resource. It's a cluster network CRD. It's used in OpenShift cluster to configure networking things like you can say in the CRD. It has a cluster network. It's the CIDR is a list of CIDRs for container networking. The network type is a CNI type defined in the CRD, and for the cluster network, it's the CIDR for cluster IP service. So in the OpenShift cluster, we use this cluster network CRD to define networking configurations. Actually, in OpenShift, there is already a cluster network operator. But right now, it only supports 3 types of CNI plugin. So we need to have our own Antrea operator to support Antrea and the CNI plugin. So when we set the Antrea in the network type of the CRD, the OpenShift cluster network operator would not deploy its own CNI plugin. It can only deploy proxy daemon set in the cluster. So for our Antrea operator, it will watch the changes in the cluster network CRD and create Antrea CNI plugin, and then update the network CRD status. For other Antrea configurations, we introduce a separate config map for Antrea operator. So during the cluster bootstrap process, user just need to add the configurations in the operator config map, and the operator will read the configurations from its own config map and set the configurations back to the Antrea config map, and then create Antrea resources. So we, right now I didn't list the config map here because it's mainly the same with the Antrea config map right now. So and with the same format and options. There is another object called operator CRD we need to add because it's a requirement for OpenShift that each operator needs to own its own CRD, and the CRD should have spec and status field. For Red Hat certification process, we need to confirm that the operator could update status in the operator CRD as well. As we already have all the configurations in the operator config map, right now in the CRD spec, we just add a useful field in the spec. For status, it's like other Kubernetes resources that it has a list of conditions with type, status, reason, message for at least the status of the object. So basically for Antrea operator, it needs to watch cluster network CRD and operator config map, and then it will start doing the reconciling process. So I think first it can validate configurations from both in the network CRD and the config map. Like we can check the CIDR format from the network CRD and check some options in the config map. To let the resources running all the time, operator can also check if the new change need to be applied again. I mean, it can compare between the existing configuration and the new configuration. Like if only a cluster network setter is changed, actually Antrea operator doesn't need to apply anything for this change. Also, if there is only option changed in the Antrea agent configuration, our Antrea operator can just kill existing Antrea agent. No need to restart the Antrea controller pod. So after the configuration validation, operator will redirect configurations to the Antrea config map and create our Antrea resources. We will have Antrea all-in-one template to render the manifest. So after we create all the Antrea resources, we will update the cluster network CRD status. As we are also, there is an extra field in the status that the spec is MTU. So we also need to update the MTU field in the status. For the, so each operator will have a cluster operator object in the OpenShift cluster. The cluster operator is also a CRD defined object. There are 3 columns for the status of cluster operator available per progressing and degraded. So you can see in this picture all the operators have shown the status here. For available, it means operator already applied configuration that is matched with the desired configuration. For processing, it means some resources are still pending to be created. And for the degraded, it means some invalid configuration or the existing state is not matched with desired state. So I list some cases for the status. Here is a workflow for the operator. Actually, it needs 2 controllers. One is the config map controller, the other is the pod controller. For the config map controller, it will watch the as I just said, it will watch the network CRD and the operator config map. If there is any change, it will do the configuration validation and then decide if it needs to render and apply manifest to create Antrea resources. After that, it will update network CRD status and update its cluster operator status. For the pod controller, it will watch Antrea deployment, daemon set, and their pod status. If there are any missing from the desired state, it will also update an error in the operator status. And if deployment or daemon set is missing, it will also apply the manifest again to make them running. So for the operator definition, actually it will be running as a pod in the deployment. And it has node toleration. So the Antrea operator could be running in not ready master node. Okay, we also need a label on the namespace because it's the label will let the pod have the host network permission. Also, I think for Antrea namespace kube system, we also need this label. For its RBAC, so Antrea operator needs the RBAC permission, including its own monitored resources and the Antrea RBAC, because only with the Antrea RBAC, operator could create Antrea RBAC resources. So for the base image, it's also a requirement from OpenShift that we need Antrea operator and Antrea pods use UBI base image. It's the Red Hat universal base image. There are also some node preparation we need to conform. First of all, as Antrea needs a node IPAM controller to be enabled, I checked on an existing OpenShift cluster is already enabled, and also for kube controller manager operator already monitors the cluster network setter from the network CRD to make sure that the node spec has the correct pod setters. So it should be fine for Antrea with the node IPAM requirement. Also for the OS kernel module, we also need to make sure it's installed and loaded on the OpenShift node. I think for this requirement, we need an init container in Antrea agent daemon side to make sure the OS kernel module is already loaded on the node. I checked one Core OS node. It's already have the OS installed. So maybe we can implement this later, but it should be in the Antrea repo instead of the operator one. The last one is we can make the Antrea operator as a generic operator, which means we can not only write on an OpenShift cluster, but we can also make it be running on other kinds of Kubernetes cluster. So we can make an option in the config map to switch between OpenShift and other Kubernetes cluster. If it's an OpenShift cluster, the network CRD and the cluster operator are specified, and for other Kubernetes cluster, we don't need these two resources. There are some reference you can take a look for more about the OpenShift operator. Yeah, that's all from my side.
Thanks, Santin. That was a very good presentation. I only have a quick question about the namespace for Antrea in OpenShift. This is not related to the operator, it's more related to OpenShift deployment. As you have showed us, the style that OpenShift typically uses is that you have a namespace for the operator and then another namespace for the resource that's managed by the operator. So I wonder if we want to have a dedicated namespace for Antrea or still use kube system in OpenShift. Let's say that we stick to the convention, we should have a dedicated namespace for Antrea. Is there any reason for not doing so from your perspective or from anybody else's perspective?
Yeah, I'm also thinking about this. If we could have a separate namespace for Antrea as well, but I'm not sure if it's already a case for Antrea, because I noticed that Antrea always use a kube system. Yeah, so yeah, I think we can do either these ways. I don't have a strong opinion to make it a separate namespace or keep using the kube system.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a strong opinion either. To me, any namespace will be fine. It's just a matter of sticking to the conventions. So if there is a convention to use a distinct namespace for each operator, then we'll probably do that. But this is a minor point, and I guess that we can sort it out even later. Is there any other question concerning the OpenShift, the operator, or deploying Antrea on OpenShift?
Not expecting an answer tonight, but do we have any plans to use an operator-based install for any other platforms besides OpenShift, or is this a special case?
Hey, this was considered. This was considered actually. So we will start with OpenShift. That will be step one, and that's, as Dantin clarified, that's because for OpenShift it is mandatory for certification purposes to get an operator, and OpenShift also uses cluster operators for everything pretty much. So there will not be an elegant alternative, but in the future we can start considering operator-based install for all the distributions. I would say starting with the on-prem distributions like Kubernetes on-prem, but then also moving to cloud distributions later. If we realize that there is actually an advantage from a user experience perspective in using the operator, which is not to be taken for granted. In some cases, the operator is not offering any advantage. In that case, we'll probably not use it.
That makes sense.
All right, and since we are already at time, is there any final question regarding the operator? Anything else that you would like to bring up, but unfortunately we'll need to discuss in the next meeting?
I guess quick question about the config map update for Antrea. I think in the diagram you showed Danting, you show that when there's a config map update, you regenerate the manifests and then you have to restart the agent pods potentially. And I want to ask if this is because currently in Antrea, we do not support live updates of the config map. As an example, for example, if you enable Prometheus metrics for the agent and the controller, you have to restart the entry agent and controller pods, or the change will not take effect. Is that why you have that kill old Antrea pods option?
Yes, I think if Antrea agent or controller already watched the config map, we don't need to restart the running pod. But if not, we need to restart kill the old pods to make the new config map be updated for Antrea pause.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we have an open issue to I think to support updating config Mac updates because people find it confusing. We have a lot of user questions about it, so maybe that will help.
Okay, that would be great.
That's all for me, Salvatore.
Thanks, Antonin. So I believe that this could be all for today, and I would like to thank everyone for attending. And I would just want to remind you that the next meeting will be exceptionally in a week time instead of 2 weeks time. So we see each other again on Monday, August 31st, 9 p.m. Pacific time, or if you prefer, 4 a.m. on Tuesday, September 1st, GMT. All right. Thank you very much, and have a good one, everyone.